Previously, we established two defining features of the Battle of September 11th. First, a sophisticated military attack overwhelmed the national airspace system. Second, chaos ensued throughout the system. This episode will describe the military operation in detail: a northern attack against New York City and a southern attack against Washington, D.C. Further episodes will detail the chaos of the day and provide primary source information about the individual events that comprised the Battle of September 11th. Last time, we established that a small asymmetrical force of just 19 individuals attacked a nation of 285 million people. In military terms, that small force was a platoon minus just 2 squads, each with 2 teams. One squad had 2 teams of 5, the other a team of 5 and a team of 4. Mohammed Atta was the platoon leader and squad leader for the northern attack against New York City. Nawaf al-Hazmi was his assistant and the squad leader for the southern attack against Washington, D.C. Each team was led by the designated pilots: Mohammed Atta, Marwan al-Shahi, Hani Honjour, and Ziad Jarrah. Despite its small size, the attacking force mounted an attack on 2 axes, each axis with 2 prongs. An attack like this is complicated and poses command and control difficulties that must be planned, replanned, and planned again. By any measure, the Battle of September 11th was ambitious and remarkable in its scope, so much so that it prompted acknowledgement that
these guys are smart.
That scope included 4 objectives: an initial objective, 2 intermediate objectives, and 1 final objective. The intermediate and final objectives each had 4 components, further complicating an already difficult battle plan to manage. The initial objective was simple in concept but complex in execution: to gain access to the national airspace system. That meant passing through security screening at multiple locations in the Northeast. All 19 attackers passed through security quickly, without detection, at 3 widely separate locations. The first intermediate objective was to operate in the national airspace system. Flight crews would be the only remaining barrier during the commandeering of 4 commercial aircraft to serve as weapons. Retrospectively, the plan was to commandeer 4 aircraft in the airspace of 4 different control centers. American Airlines 11 was commandeered in Boston Center airspace, United Airlines 175 in New York Center airspace, American Airlines 77 in Indianapolis Center airspace, and United Airlines 93 in Cleveland Center airspace. The second intermediate objective was, in the words of a watchstander at the Northeast Air Defense Sector,
strangling all the codes.
It was a sophisticated, well-planned strangle pattern. The plan was to create a host of problems by strangling each transponder in the airspace of a different air traffic control center. The attackers did not need to know what problems the plan might cause. All they needed to appreciate was that problems might be caused. If not, that was beyond their control. In retrospect, the planned second intermediate objective was brilliant. By strangling each of the 4 transponders differently, it presented a multitude of unique problems to solve. The final objective was to convert the commandeered commercial aircraft into guided missiles and strike 4 high-value targets. The commandeering pilots were trained well enough to strike 3 of the 4 designated targets. What follows is the sequence of events for each of the commandeered aircraft. Atta Al-Shahi and colleagues arrived at Boston before 6:53. All passed quickly through check-in, screening, and boarding. Aboard American Airlines 11, two attackers sat side by side in first class. Atta sat in business class, flanked by one colleague with the fifth person seated 2 rows behind. American Airlines Flight 11 checked in with its high-altitude controller, Boston Center, at 8:09. At 8:11, it was given its last known altitude.
American 11, climb maintain for level 290.
2 minutes later, it was turned slightly north, and was then commandeered at about 8:15 in the skies over Pelham, Massachusetts. 10 Pelham community members ultimately lost their lives during the attack against New York City. On the 10th anniversary, more than 100 community members attended a memorial service in commemoration. American Airlines Flight 11 was never handed off to New York Center. The reason for this is that Mohammed Atta strangled his transponder at 8:21 by turning it off in Boston Center airspace well before he made the turn south to the target. American Airlines 11 was just north of Pittsfield, Massachusetts, and crossing the New York state border. New York Center, upon detecting the plane, entered a new track and a new plane into the air traffic control system, American Airlines 11 Alpha. The original American Airlines 11 flight plan remained in the system. Meanwhile, aboard United Airlines 175, 2 attackers were seated side by side in first class. Al-Shahi was seated in business class, but with 2 colleagues 3 rows behind. United Airlines Flight 175 was handed off to New York Center at 8:40 after proceeding routinely through Boston Center airspace. Soon, the pilot reported that they had heard some suspicious transmission on departure out of Boston. Then, at 8:43, United Airlines 175 was commandeered in the skies over Warwick, New York. As at Pelham, Warwick citizens honored their 7 victims of the September 11th attacks. 5 were firefighters for the New York Fire Department. 1 was in the towers when they collapsed, and the last was a passenger aboard United 93. Marwan al-Shahi strangled the United Airlines 175 transponder code immediately after he observed the fireball at the World Trade Center from the American Airlines 11 impact. Instead of turning the transponder off, he changed the code twice. Just one code change was sufficient to cause problems for air traffic control. At the time, United Airlines 175 was over northern New Jersey skies south of Sparta. United Airlines 175 became a Mode C intruder, code 3321. A Mode C intruder is a transponding airplane not associated with a data block on the controller's console. Such intruders are not uncommon. Pilots often make code change mistakes, and the Federal Aviation Administration has a procedure to follow. Pilots are simply asked to recycle their transponder, and that was the request made to United Airlines 175. However, nothing happened. As was the case with American Airlines 11, United Airlines 175 had now become 2 planes to air traffic control. The original United Airlines 175 flight plan remained in the system. Notably, Marwan al-Shahi did not immediately fly United Airlines 175 into the World Trade Center South Tower. Instead, he flew a 15-minute wide path extending nearly to Philadelphia. That 15-minute window gave the Southern attackers time to commandeer American Airlines 77 and United Airlines 93. The sequential strangling of the transponder codes on the 2 airplanes that struck the World Trade Center caused an unforeseen problem. No one was sure what struck the World Trade Center towers. There was an order of magnitude increase in chaos at 9:03. Turning back the clock, things were happening in the southern axis of the attack. Security screening was documented for the team boarding American Airlines 77. All 5 passed through security between 7:18 and 7:36. 2, the squad leader Nawaf al-Hazmi and his brother Salim, were documented on a video camera. Boarding quickly followed. The seating pattern differed from Boston. Hanjour sat alone in first class, with the Hazmi brothers also in first class 4 rows behind. The other 2 attackers sat in coach, but not far behind the Hazmi brothers. American Airlines 77 passed through Washington Center airspace and checked in with Indianapolis Center at 8:40, just as Boston Center was requesting military support from the Northeast Air Defense Sector. The cockpit's last words to Indy Center came at 8:50, an acknowledgement to proceed on course. 6 minutes later, American Airlines 77 was commandeered in the skies over Ashland, Kentucky. Years later, a member of the Ashland Police Department would remember a call from the Federal Aviation Administration alerting them that air traffic control had lost a plane in the Ashland area. Hanjour strangled his transponder by turning it off during the turn back to target. This caused completely unforeseen issues. American Airlines 77 simply dropped off the scopes at Indianapolis Center. The algorithms that processed radar only returned failures. Even though the radar data was in the system, it did not display on air traffic controller scopes. Hani Hanjour then flew American Airlines 77 in a classic pop-up, sight target, circle to lose altitude profile, according to a staff member of the National Transportation Safety Board during a discussion with Commission staff. Unaware of developing events to the north, controllers and supervisors at Indianapolis Center decided that American Airlines 77 was down, crashed. By 9:10, they communicated that assessment to the next higher headquarters, Great Lake Region in Chicago, and to the United States Air Force Rescue Coordination Center, then located at Langley Air Force Base, Virginia. No one thought to alert the Air Traffic Control System Command Center at Herndon, Virginia. For its part, American Airlines initially thought that American Airlines 77 had somehow become the second plane that struck the World Trade Center. Chaos ruled the day. No one yet knew that American Airlines 77 was on a direct course for the Pentagon. Airport arrival was less disciplined at Newark, an indication that this team, short one attacker, was not as well organized. Boarding proceeded quickly. All attackers sat in first class, the pilot, Ziad Jarrah, in the first row, with 2 attackers 2 rows back, and the 4th at the back of the first class section. However, an unexpected variable would throw the second, intermediate, and final objectives off course. United Airlines 93 was delayed by about 40 minutes, taking off at 8:42, well behind schedule for both the flight plan and the battle plan. United Airlines 93 proceeded through New York Center airspace and was handed off to Cleveland Center at 9:23. 5 minutes later, it was commandeered in the skies over Howland, Ohio. Years later, an online posting recalled that one of the most traumatic days in American history included an episode that began 35,000 feet above Howland as terrorists seized the cockpit of United 93. However, despite this success, Ziad Jarrah was hopelessly behind schedule. He had 2 requirements: strike before 9 o'clock, which he had failed, and to strike while in Cleveland airspace. Jara waited until well after his return back to target to strangle the transponder. This triggered a different response in air traffic systems than what happened at Boston and New York. Cleveland Center simply changed the United Airlines 93 flight plan to show a new destination, Washington, D.C. This had no practical effect, but it caused major confusion for Vice President Cheney in the President's Emergency Operations Center. United Airlines 93 became a phantom threat long after it crashed near Shanksville, Pennsylvania. All that remained was for Jara to complete the fourfold final objective and strike the Capitol building. However, time caught up with him, and unarmed private citizens took matters into their own hands and did what no level of government could: end the threat and chaos of the day. Stay tuned for Episode 3, The Chaos of the Day.